The Shadow Defence Minister Angus Taylor, who joins us live now. Angus Taylor, thanks for your time. The PM seized on the comments where Susan Lee misspoke at her news conference earlier in the day, where she said that the coalition doesn't support targets in opposition or in government. If that were to be the case, it would mean the coalition would be announcing it's withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, because obviously in government you have to have targets. Now, Susan Lee says she misspoke. Is it unfortunate, though, she gave the Prime Minister a free kick?
Oh, she clarified those comments, Kieran. I think the position is very clear. We oppose Labor's targets because they're overreach, they're not realistic, and the truth of the matter is we haven't seen emissions reduce in any material way since Labor has been in government. They're still sitting roughly at the same level as when I was Minister, and then suddenly, miraculously, over the next 4 years, they're going to get to 43%, and then miraculously in the next 5 years, they're going to get to 62 to 70%. I mean, this is completely unrealistic, unless, of course, Labor is planning a major and very serious intervention in the economy. Now, the breadcrumbs are in the report on this. They have laid out that to get to their targets, there will need to be a carbon tax that moves to $300. I know they're going to introduce that as sneaky taxes through vehicle emission standards and Safeguard and the capacity investment scheme and so on. But at the end of the day, it has to be paid for by consumers. And they haven't explained what that means for food, for building materials, for vehicle costs, for the cost of transport in this country. All of those things are ignored in this report. But those costs are real. They matter to Australians, and we won't stand for a cost of living crisis being driven by Labor's energy policies.
The government's not committing to any price reduction, power price reduction, like it did initially with its $275 promise. It didn't eventuate. This time they're saying, look at the modelling. The modelling says it's going to reduce electricity prices 13% over the decade, 20% in energy prices. $1,000 per annum is what the modelling says from the Australian Energy Market Commission. But the Prime Minister and the Energy Minister keen to say that's not a political commitment of their government. Are you surprised by that, the fact that they haven't taken ownership of that particular modelling?
Look, they could get a world record in the 200-metre sprint at the speed that they're moving away from that commitment, Kieran. I mean, seriously. And the reason is because they completely failed to bring down electricity prices. Look, if you pursue the policies they do, tens of thousands of kilometres of transmission lines, requiring a huge amount of firming in the electricity grid, of course it's going to raise costs, and that's exactly what's been happening, and it will happen again under this government. So they are running away from that commitment, and it's because it's unsustainable. Look, they haven't been honest with Australians on the costs of the commitment they made. As I said, they've got in their own report, in the appendix, deep in the economic appendix, a carbon tax going up to $300 over time. That's a big number. That's well over 10 times what Julia Gillard had in place. They'll do it through these sneaky mechanisms they've been putting in place. But at the end of the day, we all have to pay for it, Kieran. We have to pay for it for our Hiluxes and Rangers. We have to pay for it in our food, our building materials. When we buy a house, all of that flows through. And Australians need an honest answer from this government about the true costs of what they're proposing.
What does the coalition need to do now in terms of its own approach? Obviously, you've got this review underway. It seems inevitable you're going to back away in some form from net zero by 2050.
Well, Kieran, we've always been supportive of people choosing to adopt clean energy technologies where it's good for them and doesn't put an impost on the taxpayer or of course, the customer. That's their choice to do that, and that will bring down emissions over time, I have no doubt, and that's a good thing. But we'll go through our review process. Most of all, though, we're not going to put economic imposts on Australian households. We're not going to drive a wrecking ball through our economy. We're not going to drive down our standard of living because of these policies, and that will be absolutely central to our thinking as we go through this review process.
Do you think that you need to be more open as policymakers to things like carbon capture and storage? I had the representative from the Low Emissions Technology Australia saying this stuff is working in terms of methane emissions from coal mining and so on. Does the government need to embrace this more? You would imagine it leads to less economic disruption if we can use those traditional industries in a cleaner way.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right, Kieran. And look, one of the striking things about the government's materials that they put out over the last 24 hours, there's hundreds of pages of it, of course, is that it is clear that it's going to cost a lot to have to push a carbon tax, carbon price up to $300 a tonne. It's going to cost a lot. Well, the way to get around that, of course, to encourage consumers to make their own choices without imposing taxes on them, to adopt clean energy technologies, to give them a broader range of technologies to be available. And that's why we've always been technology neutral in our approach to this. That includes carbon capture and storage, includes blue hydrogen, of course. It includes nuclear, which we took to the last election, and we'll work our way through that as part of the review. It includes making full use of gas, which this government has always been sceptical about. But that broader range of technologies gives consumers and businesses a broader range of options, and that means we have a better pathway on both affordability and sustainability. And I would have thought that that's pretty obvious, but the Labor Party has its favourites, it picks winners, it's got ideological views about different energy technologies, and that ultimately will cost Australians.
The defence treaty with Papua New Guinea hit a bit of a stumbling block at the last minute, and the government remains confident it can still get it done within the next few weeks, that it was just a few processes in the Marape cabinet. Do you share that confidence?
Well, if that was right, why did they make such a noise about it in the lead up, and not just PNG and Vanuatu? Now, we want to see these agreements in place, Kieran. I mean, we are facing the most dangerous strategic circumstances since the Second World War. We are seeing the increasing influence of the Chinese Communist Party in the South Pacific and across our region. And that does mean we need to get these sorts of agreements in place. But when you make a big noise about something and then you walk away with nothing, having promised two in a week, it seriously is embarrassing for the government. This is a foreign policy embarrassment. It's a foreign policy fail. And, Albanese made a big noise about the South Pacific when he was opposition leader, and yet he has completely failed this week. Now, I hope it gets back on track, and I hope we are able to get agreements in place. But it seriously is an embarrassing outcome this week.
But if it is stitched up within a couple of weeks, or by the time the next leaders meet, will this just be seen as a little hurdle, a bit unfortunate at the time, but part and parcel of dealing in the Pacific, where it's not always that predictable?
Well, they're promising it'll happen, but this government keeps promising things that don't happen. They promise that emissions are going to come down, and they don't come down. They promise they're going to get an agreement with Vanuatu, and it doesn't happen. They promise they're going to get agreement with PNG, and it doesn't happen. There's a big gap between rhetoric and reality when it comes to this government, and we're seeing it time and time again now, Kieran.
The Prime Minister heading to New York tomorrow. There's no guarantee he's going to meet with Donald Trump. Do you have some sympathy for him on that, given obviously the President of the United States, not easy to pin down at the moment, and I'd suggest that any leader of any persuasion would struggle at the moment, given their demands on President Trump?
Well, the underlying challenge here is that we need to have a strong US alliance at a time which is the most dangerous since the Second World War, according to our own Defence Strategic Review, and where the US alliance, which has always been incredibly important to our region, of course, it's underpinned an underwritten peace in our region since the Second World War, that alliance is more important than ever. Now, Albanese has met 3 times with the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party face-to-face, but not with the President of the United States. He needs to get serious about this, make it happen, and most importantly, strengthen that alliance, make sure AUKUS is in the position it needs to be. I'm sceptical that is possible to get to where we need to on AUKUS without getting defence spending to 3% of GDP over time. I think that the numbers just don't work. We either gut our Defence Force, or we gut AUKUS. But the two together, 2% of GDP, which is where we currently are, just doesn't make it.
Angus Taylor, thanks for your time. We'll talk to you soon.
Good to be with you, Kieran.